Before meeting Susie, I didn't really know what hints were. For me, it could be an Italian brand of suppository. I still remember that evening clearly. There were about a dozen of us at an informal dinner hosted by Alan Johnston and Claire Jenkins, who were celebrating their engagement. We were all in our final year at Edinburgh University, and I became painfully aware that in the final months of the final academic year, as spring arrives, couples either decide to commit to serious relationships or break them off in preparation for a new life elsewhere. I was in a stable relationship, ready to take a serious step, or so I thought, but I was dumped without any warning. The fact that she chose Valentine's Day to tell me bad news was especially jarring. I wasn't deeply in love with Carol, my girlfriend of 2 years, but we were living together, and that made things complicated. In addition, according to rumors, she managed to sow a lot of wild oats around campus before the final exams. It was like salt in the wound, but every cloud has a silver lining, and deep down I knew that the healing process would be shorter due to her lack of respect and attention. If it so easily became one of the common bikes on campus, maybe I was just getting away with it. My gloomy mood hung over me for more than 2 weeks, but I was determined to pull myself together and make a smile for Alan and Claire, who had not specifically invited Carol. I believed that their loyalty deserved special effort on my part. The last thing I wanted was to go to an engagement party, but what could have been a difficult evening became easy when Susie turned her spell on me. Conversations over dinner revolved around how we hoped to cope with our final exams, where anyone was headed, and whether anyone had any specific plans or ambitions. I still remember dessert portions of homemade dark chocolate mousse in tiny white porcelain molds, which were not enough for everyone. I had just grabbed the last ramekin from the buffet table when I noticed the attractive blonde next to me looking disappointed. "You can have mine," I said. "That sounds like a promise," she quickly replied in her soft Southern English accent, giving me a big smile and a wink. "And I wouldn't mind getting your mousse too." I must have stood there dumbfounded as she reached out and took the mold. "Thank you," she said, taking the spoon from the table. "I don't think we know each other. I'm Susie Dunn." "Nice to meet you, Susie," I chuckled. "Jamie Donald, but my friends call me JD." "I like it," she said. "Sounds like you're a tough spirit with good self-control." We started chatting, and it turned out that Susie was in one of Claire's study groups, and Claire invited her to help with the preparations for the evening. I was immediately drawn to her cheeky sense of humor. In addition to a great sense of humor, she was very pretty, with perky breasts and a neat, round butt. The picture was complemented by her large blue eyes, which she mischievously raised, sending me a passionate, languid smile, which made me like plasticine in her hands. I conjured up an image of a sexy, witty, smart, and fun woman with a touch of Barbie. It was only a few weeks later that I realized that I had fallen for a cunning plan. Susie's invitation from Claire was not intended to help with preparations. Not that it mattered, we were already a couple by then. Susie loved dirty hints and could be very bold. Whenever someone asked her how we met, she would say with a mischievous smile and imitating my Scottish accent that I offered to give her my mouse because I wanted her kitty. That night at Alan and Claire's dinner, I didn't actually get her kitty, but I did walk her home and did get a long kiss goodbye. We both seemed to realize that we were on the verge of a new relationship. When I asked to see her again, she thought for a moment, and I thought I might have misunderstood the situation. "Well," she said, "a lot of guys like me, but I also have enemies. Are you one of them?" I smiled with relief and played along. "I'd feel like a complete idiot if I were," I replied, and we both laughed. A week after our second date, we found ourselves in bed. I took her to Chez Pierre, my favorite French restaurant in Edinburgh's old town, hidden among the narrow streets near the castle. We had a lovely dinner with a bottle of Good Coats du Rhône. After that, I decided to use the most suggestive phrase I could think of, knowing by this point that she loved dirty innuendo. "Would you like to come up and see my engravings?" I asked. She giggled. "I'd love to. Maybe you can show me your art technique." In the bedroom, Susie was passionate, sexy, kinky, and suggestive. The next morning, there was no end to the hints. "How do you like your coffee?" I asked her. "Hot, milky, and wet," she replied, just like me. Over the summer, Susie and I were already living together. We stayed in Edinburgh after graduating from university and both managed to find pretty good jobs. Financial services are the backbone of the local economy, and that is where we have found our opportunity. Despite the apparent inadequacy of her academic studies, within weeks of graduation, Susie was offered a position in client services at Alpha General and Financial Asset Management, a leading financial asset management company. My job search experience was very different. I had to go through a brutal selection process before I landed a position as a business operations trainee at one of the largest banks. Although it's called a city, Edinburgh is more like a jigsaw puzzle of towns and villages. In the center, there is a stunning medieval old town with a huge castle perched on a rocky cliff overlooking the so-called New Town, which is 250 years old and consists of classic Georgian townhouses lined with elegant streets and gardens. Susie and I signed a lease for a ground-floor apartment in one of these lovely old houses. It was only a 10-minute walk to Susie's office. It took me half an hour to get to the bank's headquarters on the western outskirts of the city by tram, but it wasn't difficult. The only negative was the ancient plumbing and electrical wiring in the house. Who thought of putting a switch on the door frame or a socket in the baseboard? Quirky is a nice description, but unreliable would be more accurate. Every now and then we would plunge into darkness when the switchboard decided its circuits were overloaded. The gas boiler also seemed to have its own vagaries, reluctantly turning on to provide us with hot water. Our social life was amazing. Edinburgh is a cultural capital, with theaters, galleries, pubs and clubs, and restaurants offering cuisine from all four corners of the world. The atmosphere here is amazing, and major events such as the annual Edinburgh Festival in August and Hogmanay New Year's celebrations make it one of the best party towns in the world. Susie and I worked hard to get our careers off the ground, but on the weekends we lived life to the fullest, and it seemed like we had it all together. Less than a year after we met, we tied the knot and Susie became Mrs. Boydonald. Both our families and our small group of friends were very happy for us. You can get married almost anywhere in Scotland, and our celebration took place in one of the old town's most famous taverns. The English bridesmaids thoroughly enjoyed the attention of the kilt-clad Scots. Susie already knew from experience that a Scotsman wears nothing under his kilt, but her friends from England wanted to see this for themselves. Many tender English roses embraced Scottish thistles that night and received the answer they were looking for. They don't wear anything, everything is in working order. It was a great party and everyone was in good condition, as they say. Traditionally, no one should leave before the newlyweds. Susie and I were about to sneak away quietly around midnight when Claire held her up, dragging her to some girl talk while Alan insisted I join him at the bar for a one-on-one. Alan was very drunk. "You're a great guy," he told me, stuttering slightly and giving me a friendly pat on the back. He leaned towards me conspiratorially. "I'm sure you and Susie will be good for each other. Just ignore all these hints." "Don't worry," I replied. "I can handle it. That's one of the things I like about Susie." He looked puzzled. "Well, I'm sure that's all in the past anyway." I had no idea where this conversation was going, and he seemed to have lost track of what he wanted to say. I wonder how much Alan managed to drink, but then Claire came over to take her besotted husband and let Susie and I sneak away. Life with Susie was everything I wanted it to be. We were in the heart of one of the best cities in the world, working at top companies with promising careers, and our sex life was amazingly good. Of course, hints were our constant companions. My affectionate nickname for her was Juicy Sue. I always knew when she was in the mood for wood. "Are you glad to see me, or is that a gun in your pocket?" she asked me when I came home from work. Almost every Saturday she asked if we should eat out or stay and eat at home. If she wanted an early night, at dinner she would ask what I wanted for dessert: apple pie with cream or leftover cream pie. Lying in bed on a weekend morning, she smiled at me and offered me breakfast with honey. Susie's hints extended beyond our personal lives. She often talked about work issues, workloads, and assignments in the same vein. "Jeff is a little dense in every way," she said, giggling. Or, "Sheila enjoys working under Charlie. I hope she can handle the heavy workload." Or, "Henry's secretary is very flexible. I hear she does everything she can to please him." The first hint that all was not well came at one of those disgusting, self-aggrandizing parties that the financial sector throws from time to time. This one was just before the start of the political campaign in the election year. All possible influential persons were invited, and local politicians, whose muzzles were immersed in feeders of champagne and canapés. The lower echelons of management at our bank and our colleagues from other organizations were required to be there to lick ass as much as possible or engage in sycophancy. I guess there were about 400 or 500 people there in total, which isn't a lot for such an event, but Edinburgh sometimes feels more like a town than a city. Both Susie and I were there with our colleagues, but we were all caught up in the routine of smiling and chatting with key contacts. So beyond a quick hand greeting, Susie and I didn't speak the entire evening. Very few of our coworkers knew that Susie and I were related because Susie continued to use her maiden name at work. I thought her arguments that my good Scottish surname, Donald, was associated with racism, sexism, xenophobia, and various other undesirable attributes, including an outrageous hairstyle, were valid. So at work, Susie Dunn worked at AgFam, and in her free time, Susie Donald enjoyed the company of her happy husband. Politicians can be incredibly careless, as well as arrogant and arrogant. Why we trust them to do anything more than open a door is beyond me. Add free alcohol to the mix, and you have a walking, talking recipe for disaster. Tom Hutton was a balding, old-fashioned local politician with a beer belly. He had been in politics for over 40 years, rising through the ranks by any means, fair or foul, and now he chaired the city's Finance and Investment Committee. Hutton has survived all sorts of political scandals over the years, and his nickname was Teflon Tom. Nothing stuck to him, usually because he always took care of himself. His hobbies were said to include drinking and women, and he was married 3 times and divorced twice. The current Mrs. Ray Hutton was of Eastern European descent and was rumored to have previously worked as an entertainer or exotic dancer. There was some debate about whether she was a Polish dancer or whether her specialty was pole dancing. Some even claimed that it was somehow connected with Lapland. Walking the aisles at the reception, Teflon Tom eventually found himself in our area and decided to grace us with his presence for a while. His flushed face testified to the generous amounts of champagne he had already consumed. Clutching another glass of champagne tightly in his fist, he seemed unable to look anyone in the eye as he spoke, looking around the room to see who else was there. Of course, I had heard of him, but this was the first time we met, and he immediately disliked me. I didn't realize until the last moment that my colleagues had disappeared like summer snow, knowing full well that Hutton was a narcissistic, boring ass who would be one of the last to leave. I stayed to do my duty, pretending to be interested in what this slimy old man had to say. I consoled myself with the thought that he was a significant person and that I would receive some credit for my diplomatic skills from the higher-ups of our bank. Our banal conversation about how well the city was being run under the leadership of Teflon Tom and his colleagues began to fade. Of course, I wasn't going to debunk his view that he was right and everyone else was wrong, even if the city now has more financial debt than ever before. I knew a little about the city's finances because the city used our bank for tax revenue, financial transfers, and payments to suppliers. There were rumors of rising costs for some of the city's capital investment projects, but Hutton said things couldn't have been better. He ranted at length about his greatest efforts for the benefit of taxpayers, and I simply smiled and nodded every now and then, which seemed to be all that was required of me. I hoped I could get away when he went silent for a moment, but leaving wasn't so easy. His wandering gaze caught a passing waiter who was ordered to bring more champagne. Hutton was clearly a man who loved the sound of his own voice. Probably because I was a good listener and didn't try to get a word in edgewise, he seemed to take a liking to me. The waiter quickly returned with 2 glasses of champagne, and Teflon Tom grabbed both, handing one of them to me. "You're a good man, Jamie," he said, looking around the room again for potentially useful contacts. "Tell me, do you bankers ever mingle with financial services people?" The question seemed harmless, but I didn't have a chance to answer, and what he said next threw me off balance. "You should try it. Some of them like to have fun, if you know what I mean. And we're not talking about dogs. Susie Dunn from AgFam is stunningly beautiful. You should try it if you get the chance. Everyone calls her SD, but not for the initials. SD. Sex door." If Hutton had been paying attention to me instead of looking around the room, giggling after what he thought was a witty remark, he would have noticed my reaction. I was very angry, but managed to restrain myself. This smug old man slandered my wife, but violence was not the solution. In any case, I knew that this was the type of vile innuendo that was most likely far from reality. "Is it true?" I answered coldly. "I think I know who you're talking about, but I heard she's married." Hutton did not take the hint and continued as if nothing had happened, mistakenly believing that my obvious hostility was a matter of morality. "It doesn't bother her, but if it's a problem for you, try one of the others. Janet Strang loves good sex. If you offer them a little business, they'll pay you back. No hassle, and everyone's happy. At least that was my experience." He again looked over my shoulder at what was happening around him, but then returned to me and seemed to understand that we were on different wavelengths. He looked at me carefully with his watery, drunken eyes, then smiled one of those insincere smiles that are the specialty of fake politicians and dangerous gangsters. "It was nice meeting you, Jamie. I'll mention your name to your boss next time I see him. You know what I told you about those girls from AgFam." He fell silent and tapped his nose conspiratorially. "Just make sure you keep it to yourself." That message and the look he gave me before he left were absolutely clear. If I had said anything about our conversation, he would have gotten me into serious trouble. For me, it was normal. I knew he was talking nonsense about Susie and her colleague. Ever wondered why bank transfers take so long? It wasn't until I started working in a bank that I realized that they keep your money for as long as possible so they can use it to make money for themselves. Banks say this makes sense since money doesn't usually sit around in wads of bills or stacks of coins locked away in an old chest. Modern banks are very skillful at using your money for the benefit of the bankers and their bonuses. The bank where I worked was no exception. Transfers of any amount over 3 figures took 3 days to process, giving the bank 2 nights to make money in the credit markets. To complement this and reduce its short-term risks, the bank also held investment portfolios with investment fund managers, including AgFam. The man in charge of this lucrative activity was Jeremy Robbins, the bank's investment manager, whose small team of highly paid deputies was authorized to make trades and investments using all this temporarily held money. Jeremy was an arrogant little man in a striped suit and heavy, thick glasses. I knew a little about Jeremy from conversations with colleagues, including Sam Sutherland, who was in the same graduate group as me. Sam was assigned to Jeremy's team, and Jeremy made him bring coffee, book meeting rooms, and organize his schedule. None of these tasks should have been assigned to Sam, but he knew that if he complained, it would backfire on him. I probably wouldn't have asked Sam about our bank's dealings with Alpha General if I hadn't run into him a few days after the appointment. I was sitting in the staff cafeteria, enjoying ham and cheese toast for lunch, when he sat down next to me. We chatted about the weather and such, but soon Sam began to complain about the latest humiliating tasks Jeremy had given him. "I didn't learn anything useful about banking," he told me. "I'm just some errand boy for Jeremy. He made me pick up his dry cleaning the other day. It was bad enough to act as his personal secretary, but it's too much." "So you have to organize all his meetings?" I asked. "Yes, I have to book rooms, confirm meeting times with whoever will be at the meeting, and then set reminders on his personal calendar." "Does he have a lot of meetings?" "It's mostly internal management meetings, but he also has regular performance review meetings every week or so with our account manager at AgFam. We do a lot of business with them, but organizing those meetings is a real pain in the ass." "Why?" "It takes forever to get through to this woman, and she can never book a meeting room at their offices. Jeremy always has to meet her at the Skitlandic Hotel, which is just around the corner from AgFam. The hairs on my neck began to stand on end. I know some people at AgFam, I said. Who is this woman? Janet Strang, he replied. No, I said indifferently. Never heard of her. Susie was already preparing dinner when I got home that evening. I went and changed into my jeans and favorite Brewdog t-shirt, grabbed a punk IPA from the fridge, and we sat down to enjoy her excellent chili con carne. When Susie asked me how my day was, it gave me the chance I was looking for. Everything is business as usual, but I spoke to one of my colleagues, and he said that the availability of meeting rooms has become an issue. Are you having the same problem? Well, it depends on the size of the meeting, she replied. For large meetings, this can be an issue at times, but we have plenty of small meeting rooms. Most of them are equipped for video conferencing, so reviews and investment decisions are all recorded on video and audio. This way, there can be no misunderstandings about what the client instructed us to do. How interesting, I replied. It sounds like you have everything well organized. We have a couple of teleconference rooms in our office, but the smaller meeting rooms are pretty basic. For me, it was a Hamlet-like moment. We might not be in Denmark, but I had a feeling that something was rotten. It seemed that Janet Strang's inability to book a meeting room at AgFam was based on the alternative fact that they were all booked. However, I wasn't about to discuss with Susie what Janet Strang and Jeremy Robbins might be doing at the Skitlandic Hotel, so I changed the subject and we talked about our plans for the weekend. The weather forecast looked good and Susie and I were planning a walk through the Pentland Hills, which stretch south from the town, separating it from the rolling farmland of Midlothian. The views over the city and the Firth of Forth are stunning when the weather is clear. On Monday, I called Alan Johnston. After some persuasion, he agreed to meet me in the Grangeford bar that evening after work. With its high, ornate ceilings and sparkling mirrors, it's a busy place almost every day, but on Mondays it's usually quiet, and I knew we wouldn't be overheard. We settled into one of the wooden-paneled corner booths with a couple of pints of IPA. So what did you want to talk about that couldn't wait, JD? He asked me. To be honest, Alan, this is about hints, I replied. They got me. I thought it would be like that. You mentioned it when Susie and I got married. Yes, I don't know what to say, he replied. Claire told me that Susie was a bit of a free spirit, but it was her ex-boyfriend, Bobby Jackson, who got her into these high-end sex parties that people gossip about. All this was news to me. Susie and I had never discussed our past stories in great detail, but I wasn't going to stop Alan from spilling all the details about what Susie had been up to before she met me. Was she forced to do something against her will? I asked him. No. Claire says Susie liked it, but Bobby had a twisted mind. He liked to watch her have sex with other guys, and he took a lot of pictures, not really trying to keep them secret. Have you seen these pictures? I asked. Personally, no, but Claire says she's seen them. She says they show Susie horizontal dancing with some of Edinburgh's elite. Nothing too weird, though. Nothing kinky. Thanks, Alan. Anyway, I'm wondering if she's hiding something from me. She had plenty of opportunities to tell everything. Maybe she was trying to save your feelings. She broke up with Bobby when she found out he was showing those pictures. This was before she met you, so she's probably afraid to say anything because you'll think she is bad. Anyway, it's all in the past now. Claire had a heart-to-heart with her on the night of your wedding, and Susie told her that she would never do anything to hurt you. Okay, I guess I always knew Susie was sexually adventurous. From what you're saying, I think she was vulnerable and her ex-boyfriend took advantage of that. He exploited her. Let's hope no one else gets the same idea. That's right, Alan said. We talked some more about getting the four of us together for dinner soon and decided to pitch the idea to our wives and let them pick the date. As far as we could tell, Susie and Claire hadn't spoken in quite some time. Things got off to a bad start the following week when the old gas boiler decided to go on strike. Neither Sue nor I could start it, despite repeated attempts to reset it. In the end, we settled for boiling water in the kitchen kettle for a warm wash instead of a cold shower. Our landlord, little Davy, was quite a nice man, but a very stingy man and did not want to invest in a new boiler. Alex, the good guy from Kingston Gasfitters and Plumbers who fixed the boiler last time, explained to us that a number of worn components were causing the problem. In other words, the boiler was suffering from old age. This time, after various phone calls, Davy managed to get Alex to agree to come to us the next morning and try to get something done. I called Susie to tell her the good news, but she was not impressed. She told me that she had an important meeting on Tuesday that she couldn't miss, so I would have to stay at home and wait for the plumber to come to fix the boiler. The bank is very flexible when it comes to working from home in cases where office work is not possible, so I was able to get permission from my boss without too much trouble. We all have laptops or tablets as well as mobile phones, so staying connected is easy. The mood at home that Monday evening was rather chilly, not least because the central heating was not working due to a problem with the boiler. Susie was a little relieved that AgFem offices like ours have showers for employees who ride bicycles to work. She planned to take a bag with toiletries and a towel to freshen up before her big meeting. Dinner was a microwave chicken curry that tasted absolutely nothing. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I had a question to ask Susie. Do you manage the city's investment portfolio in AgFem? Well, actually, there are several people in charge of various investment funds and related operations, but I am the account manager. Why do you ask? Just wondering. She looked at me curiously. I wonder what? How is the city doing financially? She looked relieved. Stupid. You know I can't tell you anything about our clients. I didn't expect you to tell me anything, I replied, trying not to show my growing anxiety. The next day I was working on a business development report for the bank while waiting for Alex to arrive. By 11:30 he was still not there, so I called Kingston to find out what was wrong, and it came in handy. Alex's wife, who was heavily pregnant, gave birth prematurely, and he now eagerly awaited the birth of his first child in the maternity ward at Simpson Royal Infirmary. Kingston left a message for Davy to let him know that Alex was unavailable and that someone else would be arriving on Wednesday, but no one informed me of the change in plans. I have to admit that having a baby is a really good reason not to come and fix the old boiler. It was inconvenient to be without a cauldron for another day, but children are more important than cauldrons, both for the alphabet and for any other reason I can think of. I hope everything goes well for Alex and his wife. In the meantime, I decided to follow Susie's lead by taking toiletries and a towel to the office to shower and freshen up before calling it a day. I finished the draft report, made myself a sandwich for lunch, packed my things, and took the tram around 13:30. The tram moved slowly west through the city center, passing the Scotlandic Hotel along the way. That's when I noticed Susie walking down the street and saw her turn and walk through the hotel door. The hotel had a coffee shop and restaurant, and I wanted to believe that Susie was just going out for a snack or coffee. I also wanted to believe that Janet Strang was simply incompetent at organizing meetings, and that the Scotlandic Hotel was simply a convenient meeting place. The problem was that I couldn't be sure. I got off the tram at the next stop and walked back to the hotel. I could check out the coffee shop and restaurant. If Susie had seen me, I would have simply said that I noticed her from the tram and decided to stop by and tell her about the boiler. It only took me a few minutes to walk to the hotel, but there was no sign of Susie in the lobby, coffee shop, or restaurant. I couldn't check the women's restroom, but I sat next to her and decided to wait a few minutes in case she was there. Then Teflon Tom entered. He purposefully crossed the lobby without looking in my direction, pressed the elevator button, the doors opened, and he disappeared inside. The indicator panel showed that the elevator had stopped on the 3rd floor. I had a bad feeling when I approached the hotel reception. The young man behind the counter looked up as I approached. "Sorry," I said. "I need to contact your guest, Miss Susan Dunn. May I call her room?" "Of course, sir. Let me check. This is number 329. I can connect you from here, or you can call from the phones in the lobby. Just dial the room number. I wanted to make sure there was no mistake, so I went to the phones in the lobby and dialed 329. Hello, she said. This was enough to recognize her voice. I put on my best German accent. Frau Fischer? No, she replied. There's no one here by that name. Sorry, wrong number, I said in a German accent and hung up. Without smoke, there is no fire, I thought as I climbed the stairs from the lobby to the third floor 10 minutes later. For what I had in mind, I had to be careful. I needed more evidence to be sure of what Susie was doing in room 329, and I waited long enough. In the third floor hallway, there was a fire alarm panel under glass. I smashed it with my elbow, and the sound of the alarm was deafening. I had time to stand behind the vending machines and ice maker before the door to room 329 opened. Teflon Tom came out first, his shoelaces untied and his jacket and tie on his hand, tucking his shirt into his trousers and hurriedly heading towards the fire escape. He was followed by Susie, who paused for a moment, leaning against the door frame to quickly put on her shoes before hurrying after him, buttoning her blouse as she went. I had seen enough for my purposes and was not going to try to catch up with them. I was furious, but I had other plans. I waited another minute before heading downstairs and leaving the hotel, confident that Susie and Teflon Tom were out of sight as quickly as possible. Then I took the next tram to my office. Sam Sutherland enjoyed a day away from errands for Jeremy Robbins, who flew to London for a senior management team meeting. I found him at his desk, reading materials for one of the tests we all had to take to pass the professional exams at the end of the year. I think I can do you a favor, I told Sam. I spoke to my friends at AgFam. Don't tell Jeremy, but I might be able to arrange something so they don't have to use the coffee shop at the Scotlandic Hotel. Sam grinned. That's great. He's due to meet Janet Strang at 2 p.m. on Monday next week. I'll see what I can do, I replied. Taking a leaf out of Teflon Tom's book, I tapped my finger on my nose and added, just make sure you keep this to yourself. I had no intention of setting up a meeting room for Jeremy and Janet, but Sam didn't know that. Of course, he was a little disappointed when I contacted him again later that day to let him know that it didn't work out. Maybe next time, he said. We'll see, I replied, but I had other plans for Jeremy and Janet. There are several private detective agencies in Edinburgh dedicated to investigating matters of adultery, but they could not add much to what I saw with my own eyes. What would be the point? I wasn't about to gather more evidence that Susie was cheating on me. However, I wanted to get my dirty laundry out, and the Edinburgh Daily Post seemed the best place to do it. The latest scandal uncovered by the Post involved extortion of construction contractors by a group of city officials who were lining their own pockets. The officials were now Her Majesty's guests in prison, and the man who had done all the hard work to put them there was the Post's chief investigative reporter, Dan Weatherston. I called him and gave him a brief summary of what I thought was going on, and we agreed to meet the next morning while Kingston repaired the boiler. It's strange how quickly our emotions change. 1 minute you win the game, and the next minute you lose. The cup seems to be won and then lost. Defeat escapes from the jaws of victory. This sudden change from joy to despair is really confusing, and I guess the same thing happens with love and hate. It's not that I suddenly hated Susie, but I despised her for what she did. I felt pain and humiliation and was going to make sure she didn't get away with it easily. There would be showdowns and painful conversations, but for now I wanted to enjoy what we had before it disappeared. On Saturday, I rented a car and Susie, and I drove north to St. Andrews along the coastal route through East Nyuk, stopping at one of the old fishing villages along the way to take photos and enjoy the crabs and lobsters sold at a stall on the pier. The sun was shining, and it felt like Susie's smile drove away the rain clouds. We had lunch in St. Andrews and walked hand in hand along the vast sandy beach next to the old course. The wind gradually picked up, and it soon became clear that a storm was brewing as we headed back to the car. That evening, as the storm swept in from the North Sea and the rain pattered on the apartment windows, there was no hint. We had a light dinner of smoked salmon with a glass of excellent New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, then went to bed early. When I returned from the bathroom after brushing my teeth, she was lying on her back on the bed, completely naked, showing herself off to me. She raised her arms to pull me towards her, but I wanted to take things slowly. "I love you, JD," she whispered in my ear. "I love you too, Susie," I whispered back, knowing I was telling the truth, but also knowing that my love for her had been mortally wounded and damaged beyond repair. On Tuesday of the following week, Susie had news over dinner. "My boss has been suspended while there's some kind of investigation going on. It's all very hush-hush, and we haven't been told what it's all about, but I've heard a rumor that it has to do with pandering. I have no idea what that means. Maybe he used inside information for personal gain or something like that." I was surprised that Susie misunderstood and didn't suspect anything. I could have said nothing, but I wasn't going to miss the chance to sow doubt. "Perhaps," I replied, "but I'm not sure. The word pander comes from Pandarus, the name of the dirty old man who arranged the affair between the two main characters in Shakespeare's play Troilus and Cressida." Susie looked puzzled. "And what does this have to do with insider trading?" she asked. "I'm not sure. A pander is a pimp who provides sexual services, so the investigation may be related to sex trafficking. Maybe your colleague paid for sex and provided false expenses." Susie frowned, and I thought she looked a little worried. "I still don't understand. I mean, why would Bobby do something like that?" "Wait a minute," I said. "I thought your boss was Erica Smith. She's the department manager, but Bobby Jackson is my team leader." "I see," I replied as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Looks like you'll have to wait and see what happens. It'll probably all become clear soon." When I got home Wednesday night, Susie was in tears, and it took me a while to get her to talk about the latest news. She was upset, but also furious that she had lost her job. "I was fired for moral failure, damn it. What the hell?" They tried to explain it, but I had to look it up in the dictionary. It's because of an act or behavior that seriously violates accepted standards. I had no idea that our contracts have a clause on termination for moral failure. They are hypocritical, deceitful, two-faced bastards. "Has anyone else been fired for the same reason?" I asked, although I was almost sure of the answer. "Bobby Jackson and Janet Strang were fired for the same reason," she replied, then added, "Bobby was suspended yesterday, and it seems Janet got the same treatment." I was wondering if she would tell me the whole story at this stage. "So tell me how it all happened," I asked. "It happened so suddenly. I was called into a meeting with Erica, and the HR manager was there. That's when they gave me the bad news. Fired immediately, damn it. Without any notice, I couldn't even get back to my desk. The HR manager walked me to the front door, took my badge, and returned me the jacket and bag that someone had brought while I was at the meeting." Susie decided to tell me about the events of the day, but not what led up to them. She was no closer to explaining all the details, and I concluded that it would have to wait until the dirty laundry was hung out and aired. Susie felt she had grounds to appeal her dismissal, but she didn't want to explain her reasons, and I didn't want to bring it up as a talking point. After her initial outburst, Susie withdrew, and we spent a quiet evening in front of the TV. On Thursday afternoon, I brought home a copy of the Edinburgh Daily Post. Above the photos of Susie and Hutton was the headline, "Managing Her Briefcase." The Post can exclusively reveal that police are investigating evidence of irregularities in business dealings between Alpha General and Financial Asset Management Limited and its major clients, including a city and a major bank. As it turns out, the man in charge of securing regular deposits on behalf of the city is none other than Teflon Tom Hutton. He was seen leaving room 329 at the Scotlandic Hotel after meeting an AgFam employee who had reportedly been sacked for moral failure. It looks like the situation could get even stickier for Hutton, who is eyeing re-election in next week's election. Meanwhile, the Post has learned from AgFam staff that they have no shortage of well-appointed small meeting rooms in their office, which are just around the corner from the Scotlandic Hotel. There was no sign of Susie, and as far as I could tell, all her belongings were gone. This didn't surprise me much. The newspaper is published early and arrives at local newsstands before noon. There is also an online version that contains video and audio that supports online versions of the articles in the newspaper itself. I sent Dan Weatherston a short message thanking him for the article and reminding him to cut out the video clip I had filmed at the Skotlandic Hotel, which he used to illustrate the online version of the article. I didn't want that short clip of Susie leaving room 329 to remain on the Post site any longer than necessary. After all, her personality was of little interest to the public. However, the Teflon Tom scene could play on endless repeat as far as I was concerned. I received a text from Susie the evening she left, saying she was heading south to stay with her parents for a while. She never returned to Edinburgh, and I sent her divorce papers to her parents' address. We met briefly a couple of months after she left, when I was in London on bank business. She told me how Bobby got her a job at AgFam in the first place, and that sexual favors for Teflon Tom and a few other people were small things compared to what she had done before. She viewed it as just business and considered her business and personal life to be two separate existences. It seems that Susie's friend Claire suspected that the leopard had not changed his spots, which explained the cooling of their friendship. My feelings for Susie have changed. I still loved her to some extent, but now I saw her as a sweet, pretty, but fallen woman with a kind heart. Either way, I'm not one to forgive and forget, as Bobby Jackson, Jeremy Robbins, and Tom Hutton found out. Bobby received a 3-year sentence for pimping. Jeremy decided to retire early from the bank after receiving an offer he couldn't refuse, and Tom was told not available by voters. His third wife filed for divorce, leaving him with virtually no funds for future investments or entertainment activities.